Rolex is one of the few brands, if not the only brand, that has a very specific aesthetic. They are sporty, they are active, they are tool watches. That's kind of their main DNA. In the 50s, they came out with the Submariner.
When you hear the word Rolex, your mind probably jumps to images of power, prestige, and wealth. A CEO closing a deal, a movie star stepping onto the red carpet, an entrepreneur raising a glass to their first million. For decades, Rolex hasn't just sold watches. They've sold an idea, a dream, a symbol. And for millions of people, that dream is worth $10, $20, even $50,000, all for a piece of metal wrapped around your wrist. But what if I told you that dream wasn't real? What if the Rolex you proudly wear or secretly lust after isn't what it seems? What if the truth behind that polished crown logo didn't begin in a quiet Swiss village, but in a massive, neon-lit factory city thousands of miles away? Because behind the shimmering boutiques, behind the carefully curated ads, and beneath that legendary reputation lies a story that Rolex never wants you to hear. A story of global supply chains, corporate loopholes, secret factories, and one massive illusion so well orchestrated that even the most loyal fans fell for it. And in 2024, that illusion cracked publicly. See, Rolex isn't just about craftsmanship or luxury, it's about perception. And perception can be powerful, but perception can also be manipulated. Because when you see Swiss made stamped on the dial, it paints a very specific picture in your head. A romantic one, but that image, it's a fantasy. What's real is something very different. What's real is a cold, industrial truth. One that could make you see your $15,000 status symbol as something built for a fraction of the cost in a factory you've never even heard of. And when the truth leaked, when the evidence surfaced, the industry said nothing, but their silence said everything. So, if you thought you knew the luxury world, buckle up, because what you're about to hear might change how you see that crown forever. Rolex didn't become a global icon by making good watches. Lots of companies make good watches. Rolex became Rolex by selling something far more valuable, an idea. The idea that a Rolex isn't just a timepiece, it's a milestone. It's proof that you've arrived. And they didn't do this overnight. For over a century, Rolex has built one of the most powerful brand images in the world. Luxury, success, precision. These words don't just describe the product, they describe the feeling Rolex sells. Let's be honest, most people don't buy a Rolex because they need a watch. They buy it because of what it says about them. Because when you see that crown on someone's wrist, it tells a story. Maybe that person made it big. Maybe they closed a major deal, retired early, or just wanted to reward themselves. But whatever the reason, that watch isn't just about time, it's about status. And Rolex knows that better than anyone. They've carefully engineered an image of perfection. Picture it, a tiny workshop tucked away in the Swiss Alps. A master craftsman with silver hair hunched over a workbench, meticulously placing gears under a magnifying glass. You imagine peace, tradition, and a level of care that feels almost sacred. That's the vision Rolex wants you to believe. That's the fantasy you're buying into when you step into a boutique and drop 5 figures on a timepiece. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Most of that fantasy is manufactured. The romantic idea of hand-assembled watches and old-world Swiss artisans carefully crafting each piece like it's a holy relic. It's just not how things work anymore. Yes, Rolex does assemble watches in Switzerland, but how much of that watch was actually made there? That's where things start to unravel. Because while your eyes are focused on the brand name, the gold casing, and that smooth second-hand sweep, your mind is picturing Switzerland. But the story of that watch didn't start there. Not even close. The truth is, the watch you're admiring might have started its journey thousands of miles away, in a place Rolex would rather you never see. A place that doesn't appear in their ads. It's not snowy, it's not quiet, and it's definitely not Swiss. So, if you've been picturing skilled artisans in quaint villages polishing gears by candlelight, get ready to replace that image with something completely different. Because the next chapter of this story, it begins in a place called Shenzhen. Forget everything you thought you knew about watchmaking. Forget the Matterhorn, the snow-capped peaks, the aging Swiss masters hunched over tiny gears. Because if you want to find the true birthplace of your Rolex, you'll have to go east, far east, to a city called Shenzhen, a sprawling, high-tech megacity on China's southern coast. Home to over 17 million people, it's not a place you'll see in luxury brochures, but it is where much of the global watch industry, luxury and otherwise, actually lives lives and breathes. Here's a number that will blow your mind. Over 95% of the world's watches are produced in China, and Shenzhen leads the charge. We're not just talking about cheap knockoffs or digital throwaways. We're talking about real components, high-end components, used in watches that sell for thousands, even tens of thousands, in boutiques worldwide. Dials, bezels, cases, sapphire glass, stainless steel bracelets polished to perfection. If it goes inside a luxury timepiece, chances are Shenzhen knows how to make it, and has for decades. Since the 1980s, when manufacturing began shifting across the border from Hong Kong, Shenzhen has exploded into the undisputed powerhouse of global watchmaking. The city isn't a single factory, it's a living ecosystem. Entire industrial zones are dedicated to watches. Hundreds of suppliers operate in perfect coordination, often located just blocks from one another. Need a polished ceramic bezel? Walk 5 minutes. Sapphire glass cut to exact tolerances. Down the street. CNC milled steel cases? Around the corner. It's all there. Economists call this industrial clustering, where every stage of production is hyper-concentrated for speed, cost efficiency, and scale. And yes, that includes parts for luxury brands, including the one with the famous crown. Now, here's where it gets murky. See, when a luxury watch says Swiss made on the dial, most people assume it means the whole watch was made in Switzerland. But legally, that's not what it means. Under Swiss law, Swiss made only requires that 60% of the watch's value, not its parts, not its labor, comes from Switzerland. And value includes branding, marketing, final assembly, and R&D. Translation? A watch that's 40% Chinese made can still legally carry that prestigious Swiss label. Here's how the game works. A factory in Shenzhen produces the case, the strap, the dial, maybe even movement components. These parts are then carefully packed and shipped off to Switzerland. There, a team of skilled workers, often with the help of automation, assembles the pieces, adds final polish, engraves the logo, and maybe adjusts the movement. And just like that, boom! It's Swiss made, and the price skyrockets. That $12,000 luxury watch you just bought, it might have spent most of its life inside a shipping crate or factory floor, nowhere near a Swiss Alp. But that's the beauty of branding. It doesn't just sell you a product, it sells you a feeling. And Rolex, they've turned that feeling into billions. But in 2024, the illusion started to crack. Not from rumors, not from whistleblowers, but from leaks so undeniable that even Rolex couldn't spin their way out. It started as a whisper, a few blurry photos shared in obscure watch forums, a TikTok clip that barely cracked a few thousand views. But then came the videos, grainy, shaky, but impossible to ignore. Footage from deep inside Shenzhen factories, box after box, stacked to the ceiling, labels visible, logos partially covered, and inside, Rolex-style components, bracelets, bezels, crowns, dials, movement parts, all identical to what you'd find in a boutique selling 5-figure timepieces. And the people filming? They weren't whistleblowers, they were factory workers, taking casual phone videos of their everyday surroundings, probably not even realizing they were about to flip the luxury world upside down. Once the footage hit YouTube, things snowballed fast. Collectors broke down every frame. Forums exploded. Watch experts debated what was real, what was fake. But deep down, most of them knew this wasn't a fake Rolex factory. This was the factory. And that's when everything changed. Speculation turned into suspicion. Suspicion turned into panic. Not public panic, but the kind that happens behind boardroom doors. Because now, the illusion had a hole in it. And through that hole, the entire world could peek inside. And how did Rolex respond? They didn't. No statement, no legal threats, no denial, just silence. But for those paying attention, their next move was even louder than words. Quietly, in select markets, Rolex dealers began slashing prices on some of their most iconic models. The Submariner, the GMT Master II, the Oyster Perpetual. Price drops of up to 20%. No press release, no announcement, no explanation. Just quiet markdowns on watches that were, for years, untouchable. For a brand built on the myth of scarcity and exclusivity, that move was seismic because Rolex doesn't do sales. They don't discount unless they have a reason to. And this time, they did. Behind the polished glass of boutiques and the velvet displays, the mood was shifting. Not with customers, but with insiders. Watch resellers, collectors, and gray market dealers, people who made a living on Rolex scarcity, were watching their models sit unsold. The second-hand market cooled. The hype slowed. The legend just a little less shiny. And that's when everyone started asking the question Rolex has spent decades avoiding. If the parts come come from China, if the assembly is automated, if the value is in branding, not craftsmanship, then what exactly are we paying for? Because when the curtain's pulled back and the machine is exposed, you start to wonder, was it ever really about the watch, or was it always about the illusion? For decades, Rolex's most powerful weapon hasn't been craftsmanship. It's been scarcity. Want a brand new submariner? Good luck. You'll probably have to wait months, sometimes years, or maybe spend tens of thousands more on the resale market, where prices skyrocket simply because Rolex can't make enough. That sense of rarity, it's addictive. It makes the watch feel like a secret club, something only a chosen few can access. It's what fuels the hype, the FOMO, the flex. But after the 2024 leaks, that illusion started to collapse fast, because suddenly people weren't just questioning the parts inside their watches. They were questioning the game itself. Why were people paying $20,000 for a GMT Master 2 when the components were made in the same industrial parks as watches sold for a fraction of the price? Why were boutique shelves empty, but warehouses in Shenzhen full? And then the numbers came in. In the months following the leaks, Swiss watch exports, a long-standing point of national pride, plummeted, not just a dip. A 20-year low outside the COVID crash. Collectors noticed first. Watch forums, once buzzing with hype, were suddenly flooded with caution. Posts like, "Why are prices slipping? Why isn't my Daytona selling? Anyone else sitting on inventory?" Private dealers, the ones who once bragged about flipping pieces for 2 to 3 times the retail price, started panicking. Their stock was no longer moving. That guaranteed markup? Gone. It wasn't just Rolex either. Cartier, Omega, even independent brands. They all felt the shift. Because once you break the spell of exclusivity, it doesn't matter how well a product is made. It's no longer a luxury. It's just a watch. And that's devastating for a business built not on function, but on fantasy. The worst part? Rolex didn't say a word. No effort to reclaim the narrative. No attempt to re-establish control. Just eerie silence. And that silence was louder than any statement. Because deep down, collectors knew if Rolex really made everything in-house, if those leaks were lies, they'd be suing. Instead, they were slashing prices. And the market got the message. The crown had slipped. Not completely, not overnight, but just enough to plant the seed of doubt. And while the traditional luxury market stumbled, something unexpected rose to take its place. A new kind of collector, a new kind of watch, and a new kind of truth the luxury world could no longer ignore. Here's where things get really interesting. Because as the old guard of luxury stumbled, something else began to surge. No, not fakes. Not the $60 knockoffs you find at shady flea markets or sketchy websites. This was something entirely different. More precise, more legal, more dangerous. Enter factory-built homages. These watches don't pretend to be Rolex. They don't have fake logos or counterfeit serial numbers, but they look nearly identical. They feel just as heavy, and they're built in the same factories. Let that sink in. These aren't knockoffs. These are OEM-grade pieces. Original equipment manufacturer builds, often made by the same hands, on the same machines, using the same materials as the big names. The only difference? They skip the logo and the price tag. No authorized dealers, no boutique markups, no illusion of scarcity. Thanks to encrypted messaging apps like Telegram, WeChat, and private Discord channels, buyers can now connect directly with the factories. They choose their case style, dial color, movement type. Some even pick specific engravings. And what would cost $12,000 in a boutique now runs $300 to $600 out the door. Legally, it's a gray area, but it's not illegal because there's no branding, no copyright infringement, no deception. These are homages, not counterfeits. And to many collectors, they're more honest than the luxury world itself. They say, "We know what this really costs to make. We know the markup is a myth. We just want a great watch without the story." This isn't a fringe movement anymore. It's a full-blown underground economy. Reddit threads dedicated to homages now span thousands of posts. YouTube reviewers openly compare factory-built pieces to Rolex originals, down to the millimeter. In some cases, you can't tell them apart. Same brushed finishing, same sapphire crystal, same ceramic bezels. Even the movement, the heartbeat of the watch, is often sourced from the same places Rolex and Omega rely on for parts. To the average person, indistinguishable. To a trained eye, maybe. To someone tired of the games, irrelevant. Because for many buyers, it's no longer about the prestige. It's about the principle. Why pay 10 times more for the same build just to have a logo on your wrist? Why worship a brand that's been feeding you a fantasy? The rise of homages is more than just a trend. It's a rebellion, a quiet revolution that's eating eating away at the foundation of luxury itself. And for Rolex, Omega, and every other prestige brand built on image over honesty, that's a nightmare they can't sue away. They can't control it, and they definitely can't stop it. Because once people realize that you don't need the crown to wear the quality, the myth loses its power, and what replaces it is truth, raw, unfiltered, and ticking. Let's strip away the branding. Let's forget the myths, and let's talk money. Because if you really want to understand the luxury watch industry, you have to follow the numbers. Start with this. A typical Rolex that sells for $10,000, industry veterans estimate it costs somewhere between $2,500 and $4,000 to produce. That includes materials, labor, logistics, everything. In other words, the markup is anywhere from 2.5x to 4x, depending on the model. And in many cases, it's even higher. Compare that to other respected brands. Christopher Ward, for example, a British watchmaker, publicly states they never charge more than 3 times their production cost. Omega, closer to 4x. Fair, given the R&D and branding costs. But Rolex, 5 madangu, sometimes more, especially on hot models like the Daytona or Sky Dweller. And yet, they're not just another luxury brand, because Rolex operates under something very few people know about, the Hans Wilsdorf Foundation. It's a non-profit. Yes, you heard that right. Rolex is structured as a charitable foundation. Sounds noble, right? Like the profits are going to good causes? Well, sort of. The truth is murkier, because while Rolex technically operates as a non-profit, it's one of the most secretive and profitable companies in the world. They don't publish detailed financial reports. They don't answer to shareholders. They control nearly every part of their supply chain, from gold foundries to final assembly lines. That level of vertical integration means one thing: control. Total control over cost, over supply, over perception, and most importantly, over price. While companies like Apple or Microsoft operate on razor-sharp margins, 32%, 38% profit if they're lucky, Rolex enjoys margins well beyond that. And here's the kicker: they do it without ever showing the public their books. So what are you paying for when you buy that Rolex? Not better materials, not better mechanics, not even better performance. You're paying for mystique. You're paying for scarcity. You're paying for a story that's been carefully crafted over decades, protected by legal loopholes, and sold with the confidence of a company that knows exactly how much power perception holds. And when that story starts to fall apart, the numbers don't lie, because once people realize that a high-quality homage can be built for a fraction of the price, the myth starts to look a lot more like a markup. And in the age of information, markups don't go unchallenged for long. So, after everything we've uncovered, what are you really buying when you buy a Rolex? Let's be clear. Rolex watches are not bad products. They're not low quality. They're not scams. They're beautifully built, meticulously assembled, and globally respected for a reason. But that reason isn't always based in reality. Because once you strip away the branding, the mythology, and the illusion of exclusivity, you're left with a hard question. Are you buying craftsmanship, or are you buying confidence? Think about it. The materials in a Rolex? You can get those in a homage. The movement? Many homages now use near-identical specs. The design? Literally copied to the millimeter. So what's left? The logo, the story, the feeling. Wearing a Rolex gives you the quiet confidence that comes from social recognition, from knowing people will see it, from the internal voice that says, I made it. But here's the uncomfortable truth. That feeling isn't in the steel. It's in your head. That's the real product Rolex is selling: status. And in a world where factory-built homages look and feel the same, where digital leaks have exposed the dirty details of supply chains, where pricing feels less like craftsmanship and more like corporate strategy, that status suddenly feels more fragile than ever. Because now you know the truth. You know about Shenzhen. You know about the Swiss-made loophole. You know how a $3,000 build becomes a $12,000 illusion. And you know there's an entire shadow world of collectors, smart collectors, building their own watches without the markup, the myth, or the waitlist. That doesn't mean Rolex is doomed. Far from it. They'll survive this, maybe even thrive, because status is hard to bury. But for you, the viewer, the buyer, the curious outsider, this is a turning point, because now you're not just another customer. You're informed. And when you walk past that boutique window and see the shimmering display, ask yourself, are you buying superior engineering, or are you just paying for a story that's slowly coming undone? The choice is yours. But here's the bottom line. In 2025, luxury doesn't mean ignorance anymore. It means knowing the truth and choosing what matters to you. Because sometimes the real luxury isn't what you wear, it's knowing why you wear it. And if this pulled back the curtain for you, hit that like button, subscribe for more truths the luxury world doesn't want you to know, and check out the next video on your screen. We're just getting started.